There are so many reasons why you'd want to one-trick a champion and fully master them. It might just be because you find them insanely fun. It might be because they are completely broken, so why would you want to play anyone else? Or it might be because they are unique and people don't know how to beat them. Whatever your reason is, here's 12 of our best choices for you to one-trick going into the new Season 13. There are so many benefits when it comes to learning and mastering one specific champion. League of Legends is a massively extensive game with millions of things to think about. You've got builds and rune options, counters and bans before you even get into the game. Matchups are another huge part of playing the game well as well, especially as you climb the ranks. And then limit testing is yet another factor in understanding your damage and knowing when and how you can play to your champion's strengths. There really is no big downfall when it comes to one-tricking a specific champion if your sole purpose is to climb in solo queue. Obviously, if you're playing team games, you're going to get banned out and be a little bit useless, but if you only care about that sweet LP, then it might be time for you to pick one champion up and make it your mission to be the best one-trick for that champion on your server. The first champion we've got to talk about today is Twitch. Now, Twitch can be played in so many different roles. He's obviously fantastic as an all-walking AD carry, but then you've also got tons of people playing him AP mid, you've got AP support, and even as a jungler as well. When you're perfecting AD carry Twitch, it's all about knowing how to attack move perfectly, how to farm efficiently in the early game because this is the weakest part of your game. And then it's all about staying alive, positioning yourself perfectly, getting around teamfights, dealing as much damage as you can. And if you have a Lulu by your side, well, you're going to have a lot of fun in the process. With AP Twitch, it's more about just limit testing and knowing your damage. AP Twitch's damage can be absolutely brutal to all types of targets, even the tankiest of enemies. But if you don't understand just how much damage you can deal, well, you're probably not going to actually be doing much. You're just going to be sitting there farming, auto-attacking a few times instead of farming all the kills and stacking up that soul stealer. Twitch might not be the most complex character in the game. He doesn't have an abundance of combos to get your head around, but you need to understand how to play him with his stealth, you need to understand how to maximize your damage through limit testing, and you 100% need to learn all of those matchups. Our second champion to one trick to main to learn going into Season 13 is Evelynn. Unlike Twitch, Evelynn can only really be played in one role, but she's easily one of the scariest junglers in the game at the moment. Eve has a very unique playstyle. It's all about rushing to level 6 to unlock that stealth passive and then roam around the map ignoring pink wards and deleting everybody that you come across. It's all about understanding and knowing your damage limits because this is what you need to get fed in the early game as you go into the mid game, where you become a bit of a demon. Again, Evelynn's combos are really not that tricky, but she does have quite a few little nifty tricks that you need to learn to actually play her properly. And once you truly understand how to maximize the damage and the mobility from your ultimate, you can just get away with playing so aggressively. There's just no doubt that playing Evelynn is all about stomping and snowballing the early game into the mid game as hard as you can. Now, her damage doesn't fall off in the late game, but enemy teams do have a much bigger tendency to group up and stack together. So learning how to beat teams despite this is also a big part of mastering Eve. Whether you're picking her, banning her, or one-tricking her, Eve is an absolute menace going into the new season. Next up, we've got a top laner in Camille. The top lane bruiser that doesn't need flash, the anti-tank destroyer, and one of the most consistent and sought after champions in that entire top lane roster. Camille has an incredibly high skill ceiling, so a large part of one-tricking and mastering Camille is all about perfecting how you can play her in all of those different scenarios. You have a crazy amount of matchups to learn. Some of them are pretty easy, some of them are skill matchups, and some of them are absolutely horrendous. And knowing how to overcome those bad matchups is a big part of playing this champion properly, especially at the higher rank you go when people really know how to exploit this. Camille has a ton of animation cancelling combos, she has a lot of tips and tricks. In her kit design, she has that ultimate to dodge major enemy abilities. She has the mobility of her E, which makes her incredibly hard to gank. She has the defensive capability of her passive, and then of course the insane true damage in her Q. All of these different parts of her kit can be combined together for a well-designed kit that you can really push your advantage with. One trick in Camille is incredibly worthwhile, and she's one of those champions which is a bit timeless. She's always got her place in the meta. So if you are looking for a new top laner to try and to learn and to master, give Camille a go. Next up, we have Draven, and it's very hard to have any kind of list like this without including this guy. Draven is easily one of the most difficult champions and AD carries that you could play, but he's also one of the most rewarding as well. It really does just come down to catching those axes though. It's all about catching those axes relentlessly, timing your movement around them, attack moving alongside them, proccing that W steroid, and slamming enemies down with the damage you get from those axes. Mastering and one-tricking Draven is about learning two things. One, obviously, as we've just mentioned, catching those axes consistently. And two, understanding just the sheer amount of burst damage that you can actually deal with each item acquired. And because of your snowbally gold generating passive, you're going to get items and power spikes so much sooner than any other champion. So one-tricking and mastering Draven is all about actually understanding how much damage you have, and using this to snowball and destroy your enemies to the point of no return. There are some other things to think about when learning Draven. You've got your E, which is called stand aside, which allows you to interrupt enemy mobility. You've got your ultimate, which is obviously global, so understanding the timing is going to pick up free kills across the map. but the be all and end all of Draven is the axes and learning how to use them properly. Next up, we're back in the jungle but also in the top lane too with Zac. Zac is an incredibly fun tanky champion to play. He has an insane amount of mobility and a crazy amount of dive potential with that E. But he also has a ton of different tricks and combos that you can pull off, and learning all of these things really opens your eyes to this champion's potential in general. The thing that no one really expects about Zac as well though is the sheer amount of damage that he can actually pump out. Everyone knows he's a tank, he has crazy survivability, he has really good crowd control, but his damage is really underappreciated as well. So understanding this when playing Zac and knowing your damage limits as well as your survivability limits is key to learning him and perfecting him. There's loads of different things you can pick up when one-tricking Zac. Knowing how to use your Q perfectly to knock up multiple targets, knowing how to combine that with your E, knowing all the different ranges and angles you can use your E with, alongside other little things like your ultimate making you bigger, allowing you to collect more blobs and stay alive easier. There really is so many different things about Zac. And once you've learned all of those combos and tricks alongside the matchups, alongside all the different ways you can build him and play him, he is an incredibly rewarding champion to play. So as you go into Season 13, make sure you don't forget about Zac. Next up, we're going down to the support role, and no, it's not going to be Pyke or Bard that you'd expect to be in this video. This time round in Season 13, it's going to be Rakan. Rakan is definitely not one of the most popular supports in the game, but those that can play him well enough are reaping in the benefits. Rakan is easily the most mobile support in the entire game. He has an absolute ton of crowd control alongside the shielding as well. And when you actually understand how to play him properly, you know how to weave in and out of fights, dash to your teammates, dash to your enemies, knock them up, crowd control them with your ultimate, your potential impact throughout games is so damn high. Rakan definitely has a fairly unique playstyle for a support, he definitely takes a lot of practice. But this is just all the more reason why you'd want to one-trick him. The more you play him and the more you learn him, the better you get, and the better you realise just how crazy strong this champion can be. The great thing about Rakan as a support though is if you do have a good AD carry, you can just 2v2 and win in a lot of fights. But if you don't have a good AD carry, you just roam and you carry the rest of the game for your mobility, your crowd control, your gank strengths, and everything else that goes with it. And then once you get to the team fights, that's when Rakan really starts to shine because he can just CC so many enemies and engage or disengage however he wants to play depending on the game. Moving back into the solo lanes and the jungle, now we've got Gragas. Another incredibly fun champion to play that has an incredibly high skill ceiling too. First things first, the most obvious thing to learn when it comes down to one-tricking Gragas is the sheer amount of combo potential he has. There's loads of different ways you can hide animations with your barrels, there's loads of different ways you can flash E in with your ultimate and one-shot entire teams, set up ganks, CC them, whatever you want to do, you can do it with this champion. But due to his low range and his reliance on his ability cooldowns, he does take a bit more practice than you may think. Gragas is really simple to pick up though, he's really easy to learn on the fundamentals, but when it comes to his ceiling, it is so damn high. There's several different ways to play Gragas. You can play him like a bit of a bruiser in the top lane, stacking ability haste, jumping in, jumping out with phase rush. You can go for an engaging setup in the jungle, you can go for a full one-shot build in the mid lane. And all of these different ways to build and to play him are a lot of fun, and they also take a lot of practice too. Understanding your combos, understanding your limits and your damage is key to mastering Gragas. But when you do perfect him, you're going to have a lot of fun and you're going to win a lot of games in the new season. A champion that's just been so strong since his release is Akshan. And he is the next one we're going to talk about today. There are so many positive things about this champion. From bullying lanes in the early game with his long range, his shield and his movement speed, to swinging into fights and swinging back out again after getting a kill, to diving towers with that E as well, to sniping down enemies with the ultimate, and stealthing around the map and picking off targets no problem. But to top all of this off, you also have the ability to revive your entire team just by killing the right target. There is no argument as to how potent Akshan can be, but he actually does take some practice to pull him off well, because those new Akshan players will just load into the game, think they're insane, and probably just die on repeat because they're actually really squishy. Learning the matchups and learning your damage is a big part of any champion on this video, but especially so with Akshan, because your whole playstyle is dependent around snowballing. You bully enemies off farm, you dive them with your E, you snowball really quickly, you roam around the map with your stealth, and you just ruin the game and ruin everyone's chances of beating you. He is a bit of a unique pick in those solo lanes. You do have to be careful first picking him into certain matchups, but there's usually a way you can come out on top, and even if you don't, you can scale into the late game, one-shot the right target in that team fight and win the game by reviving your whole team, taking a Baron and ending the game. Next up we have Kassadin, and there's really not much we need to say about this one. Everybody knows just how scary a good Kassadin can be. It's all about scaling and farming efficiently throughout the early game. Understanding how to get through those difficult matchups, understanding how to abuse the fact that if you get a free one, if you need to, roaming around the map and picking up a few kills and getting spiking and getting stacked up sooner rather than later. Because as the game progresses, Kassadin just gets better and better. The amount of damage this guy can pump out with his ultimate in those big late game team fights is absolutely unrivaled. He's incredibly slippery because of this ultimate as well, which means it's really hard to outplay him. And if you're playing in a mobile AD carry or something, well, you've simply got no chance if Kassadin gets fed sooner rather than later. One trick in Kassadin is all about getting those items as soon as you can, getting to the point where you can one-shot everyone, prioritizing experience, getting to level 16, and then doing your job. It's all about really knowing how to get through those ugly matchups, because when you do come out on top in the lane phase, your enemies are probably going to surrender. Next up we have Kindred, and she is a jungler who has one of the most unique playstyles who's all about getting those passive marks stacked up and destroying the game because of them. Kindred is an aggressive counter jungling champion. She has a fairly unique playstyle which is all about dominating that 1v1 jungle matchup. The sheer amount of bonus attack range she can get when she gets those passive marks is what makes her scale like a monster into the late game. Kindred takes a lot of practice. You really need to study your map movements and know when you can punish the enemy jungler, but also punish them by taking their camps and getting those marks ready. You need to plan a little bit ahead by marking enemy champions and killing them to get the marks up too. And to top all of that off, you're an AD carry, so you need to attack move, you need to kite properly, and you need to tear through enemy health pools whilst you're also incredibly squishy yourself. Kindred's ultimate also takes a ton of practice as well, but it's so rewarding when you master it. Not only can you use it to save your teammates, you can use it to save yourself, you can even use it to stall major objectives because they can't die if they're inside your ultimate, buying you time to secure them with that smite and win the game for your team. Now there is a pretty obvious reason why Kindred is so much better at higher rank. She takes a lot of practice, she requires a lot of skill, but her ceiling is super high. And this doesn't mean she's not strong at low elos too. You just need to understand how to really play to her strengths and how to abuse her. Next up we have Heimerdinger, who's been dominating lanes left, right and centre, or should we say mid, bot and support. He's been primarily played in the support role, but he's all about pushing, taking plates, harassing people, poking people, lining up stuns and outplaying enemies against the odds. Heimerdinger is the champion that most people completely under-respect the most. He just looks like this little squishy Yordle that you can clean up and kill no problem. But then you go and try and actually take him down, and the next thing you know your health pool is melted away and you've barely even got a scratch on him. Good Heimerdinger players can stun entire teams with that E. They can one-shot people down with that W burst, and they can even block skill shots with their Q. Heimerdinger is easy to play, but he's also so good when you perfect him. And the fact that you can play him almost anywhere on the map right now means he's just a fantastic champion to one-trick. Oh, and by the way, just by locking him in, you're instantly going to tilt your enemies, because playing against him is not a fun experience, so even more reason to play him. Finally, our last champion to one-trick going into Season 13 just has to be Irelia. Irelia is another one of those champions that when you play against a good one, you're going to ban it for the next 6 months. She has a ton of mobility, crazy amounts of outplay potential, good sustain, loads of burst damage, and the ability to take down multiple enemies by herself. Irelia is one of those champions that everyone thinks they can play, but the truth is, unless you are one-tricking her, or at least she's one of your best champions, she's just nowhere near as easy or as good as you may think. You need to know how to stack up that passive, you need to use your W perfectly to negate incoming damaging abilities, you need to know how to Q through minion waves, you need to know if you can actually kill those minions, allowing you to get the Q reset so you can dash further and more often. Her E stun takes some practice as well. It's no way near as easy to land as it looks, but if you do land it, it feels pretty damn awesome. And then of course you've got her ultimate too. And when you combine all of these things, it brings together a kit very creative, but also very difficult to pull off. So the more hours you put into Irelia, the more rewarding it gets. If you truly understand Aurelia's limits, then you can outplay enemies in 1v2s, in 1v3s, in split pushing in the late game, in team fights with those flanks. And if you're good enough and you're against the right comp, well, have fun 1v5ing. Well, that brings us to the end of this video all about 12 of the best champions to learn and one trick going into Season 13. Don't forget, if you want to find out more about these champions like builds, runes, matchups and counters, then you can find all of this information in one place with our desktop app. Just click the link in the description to download that and bring it with you into your next game. Good luck guys, and as always, take care.